work for Salesforce, and I head the EMEA Customer Success Architects team for Salesforce, and actually recently taking over MuleSoft now. And yes, this session is about how to prepare for the final stages of the review board. This is not about logistics and what actually happens in the review board, anything official, anything to do with that. Suzanne will be joining the call later in 15 minutes. So if there are any specific questions related to the logistics, Suzanne will be taking them over. I would stick to preparation and how to prepare for the review boards. Right, okay, so let's get started. I'm not going to make this session a death by PPT session. So it's a really, short presentation just to put some structure around our thoughts, and then we'll open it up for a live Q&A. So congratulations if you're here and if you're going for your boards, especially some people are going for the boards in May. You're nearly there. You've passed your system architect's exam and you've passed your application architect exam. You've climbed the pyramid and you've been very, very diligent about it. And it is a great achievement. So I really mean it when I say congratulations, but it is really just 60% of your effort. So though it seems like the bulk of work has been done and you have all the knowledge, it's about how we bring it together and how you present it in your review board and how you structure that knowledge that you've gained over, while you've been climbing your pyramid one by one, is what that matters. And that one day actually gets you to that pinnacle, that top layer of the pyramid, which is the Certified Technical Architect certification. So I'm assuming we have a mixed group here. I know there are some people who have their boards, who've signed up for the boards. There are some who are probably still, somewhere doing their certs, or there are some who are system architects, there are some who are application architects, there are some who are both. So we'll try to tailor to all the groups here. The few prerequisites that I'm assuming everyone who is going for a review board exam will have is you'll obviously have your pre-certifications. You would have worked on a few chunky Salesforce projects, so you do understand how the knowledge that you've gained over all your studying is applied, and what's the practical application of Salesforce and the business use cases, and you understand the business needs. And you understand architecture well. So because this is an architect's exam, so it's not just about understanding Salesforce as a technology, but having a holistic view of architecture concepts. So once you've passed your system architect and your application architect side, and you are thinking about the review board, the first thing to think about is, so far, all the exams that you've done are specialized exams. So you've either done an exam on data management, you've done, you've studied about LDV, you've done integration, but you focused on integration, you've done sharing and security, but you focused on that when you did the exam. Now it's the time to bring it all together. So in the review boards, all of that knowledge and more is going to be put together. So you can't just be in your integration mind frame and ignore security. You can't just be in your sharing and visibility mind frame and ignore the application architecture bit. So this is a time where you have to start thinking of holistic solutions. Whenever you think of something, you have to get into the mindset of thinking of everything for that one requirement. So if, a paragraph of requirement in there, think about, what does security look like? What does sharing look like? What does app design look like? Is there any integration in there? If there's an integration, how do I secure the integration? If there's an integration and there's any data mentioned in there, is it an LDV? If it's an LDV, what kind of LDV? What kind of solutions will this imply? So that's what I mean by start thinking holistically. So it's because all this time when we prepare for the review boards and we give all our certifications, normally people tend to focus on one subject at a time, and then you move on from one subject to the other. And when you do the exam, you're quite focused on one area and one domain. But now all those domains come together. And the idea is the most successful people are the people who can bring it all together and think about a holistic solution. Think of all the aspects, as I said, that impact each other, that might not impact each other. So if you're thinking about a data model, think about how the data model impacts your sharing model. If you're thinking about changing licenses, think about how your licensing model impacts your sharing or your data model. What standard objects are you going to use? What custom objects are you going to use? And vice versa, as you're going through your solution, if you make a change on your solution, think retrospectively on, have you already done something that might be impacted by your change in solution from all aspects, from integration, security, sharing, app design, licenses, data model, everything. And then contextualize your knowledge. So far, you've done very well because you're a master of integration now, and you think you understand sharing and visibility to great depths, and you're confident about your SSO flows and models. But now is the time to contextualize it, right? So you know how a SB initiated flow works, but you have to put that SB initiated flow in the context of the scenario that you're doing in your review boards. So you have to make it business specific. You have to present in a way that your knowledge comes out not just as a theoretical reproduction of what you've read, but it is contextualized. You demonstrate an understanding that you understand how that particular business need is going to be met with your solution, and you have customized your solution enough to fit into the right terms and the right wording appropriate to the scenario, and not just put a textbook templated answer out there. So that is one of the most important aspects of going through a review board, is how do you contextualize your knowledge? Most people have the knowledge and most people know what they're doing, but the difficult bit is that they're not able to map it to the scenario very well. The next aspect is get organized. And by organized, I think there are three aspects of organization. One is think about what are the artifacts that you're going to produce. How are you going to produce them? Are you going to draw Lucidchart diagrams, which you can't, you won't have enough time. So think about, are you going to, flip chart it? Are you going to do it on a small paper? Are you going to whiteboard it? Are you going to just do the diagrams on the go as you present? What is going to be the structure of your presentation? How are you going to structure yourself when you're presenting and also when you're preparing your solution? I think that structure is quite important because you're under tight timelines when you're doing a CTA board, and most of us are under pressure, and in that 2 hours time you have a lot to think about, you have a lot to write down, you have a lot to produce. But then at the end of your preparation time, you go into the review board and you go and see the judges, and then you have to present. And if you're not structured, if you don't already know in what order you're going to say what, if you don't already know which artifacts do you present, what is the logical flow of your presentation, you will probably struggle to convey everything that you want to in the short amount of time that you have. And then timing is very important. Understand when you practice, how much time is it taking for you to say do the data model? How much time is it taking for you to write down your solutions? If you're scribbling on the paper, is it on the solution sheet, on your scenario sheet, is it giving you enough space? And are you able to read it back when you're presenting? So a lot of people initially just start off saying, I'm just going to scribble against the requirements on the sheet, and that's the easiest and fastest way. But then when it comes to presenting, they can't read what they've done 2 hours ago, and they lose the context and they lose their thought process. So make sure that you know how you're structuring your presentation and how you're structuring your information, but also you're timing yourself, and you know exactly how much time you will have. If you're breaking down your presentation into logical sections, make sure that you know roughly by how much time you would have covered what in your presentation, so that when you're going through it, you know exactly what you've covered and what you haven't. The other thing is when you're thinking of structure, obviously there are, most of us get the obvious ones like the data models and the integrations, the sharing, the security model. So those are the obvious important ones. Poor governance loses out a bit. It doesn't get as much love from us architects as it should, and a lot of people just ignore governance, or just don't give it enough time. And remember, it is an aspect of your solution, and a CTA board is about covering everything, all the aspects of the solution from a holistic way. So if you've missed any aspect in the solution, or if you've missed anything, even if it's governance, which is warranted as part of the scenario, then you are losing out. That means you haven't covered your scenario in its entirety. So nothing is more or less important. All of it should be, everything that's there in the scenario, all the aspects of your solution are equally important, and you shouldn't, in your mind, have weightage against each of them. So treat them equally, and give importance to all of it. And this is my last slide, really. It just says, this is the stage where you bring together your knowledge. So you have the knowledge now. It's about bringing it to practice, practicing, mock scenarios. If you can rope in help, if you can get a mentor who is a CTA, or if you can speak to people who've done their CTAs, or have a peer group, a study group, people, with like-minded people who are preparing for the CTA, and help each other out by presenting to each other and timing each other and critiquing each other. I think that's the best way of doing it. And with that, I will open up the floor for questions.
I'll kick it off, Emily.
Okay.
I have a question about one of the points that you made, and I think it was a really great one, that you need to have that Salesforce knowledge, but also like a holistic view of architecture concepts. So for folks who are approaching, maybe Salesforce is their primary experience, do you have any resources you would recommend to sort of do some of that backfill of knowledge on more non-Salesforce specific architecture patterns and things like that?
So I think the trail mix that we have for the CTA is pretty comprehensive. I'm assuming anyone who's gone through the Salesforce specific architecture exam, especially, have gone through those. And those cover a lot of the architectural concepts. And though they are Salesforce specific, I think they still, are quite relevant to the industry standards and the common industry practices. And some of the other aspects which come in are really with experience, like if people have worked on, say, a project where they've done integration, and for an integration they've had a middleware, so they would naturally be aware of maybe a MuleSoft or Oracle ESB or something, and just knowing those kind of product names and knowing a bit more about what they've used where in a practical life just helps them relate to this. So the integration exam will give them the concept of routing patterns via middleware, but having worked with an actual middleware will give them the right context for it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, Emily. It's Gemma.
Hey, Gemma.
You mentioned about governance doesn't get as much love as perhaps some of the other areas of the exam. Could you talk us through, in your mind, what governance topics or what governance means to you, and what sort of topics we could be looking at covering if we're hoping to succeed in that particular area?
So governance to me means a lot of things, and it is a broad area, but typically there, an exam would, or a scenario, any business scenario would level or would warrant some amount of governance activities. Things like having an environment strategy in place. Things like, if we're talking about multiple teams working or a complex program, having a continuous integration strategy in place, or having requirement management strategy, just knowing that what kind of governance bodies can you have to actually have some sort of a technical authority, design authority sort of bodies for your projects, which will then control and enforce your technical standards or your design standards. So knowing these aspects, which, and as I said, everyone who's worked on a good, nice, chunky project would have seen these. So it's not difficult to relate to this. So things like having a steering committee, having a design authority, and I'm not saying all of this is relevant. I mean, as I said, make it relevant to your scenario. If in the business scenario you see something that you think, oh well, there has to be a standard for it. There has to be a design standard because there are multiple development groups who who work on this. So we definitely need a source control system. If we have a source control system, we'll need something for continuous integration because that's just best practice. We'll need a technical design authority team or a steering group of some sort to then control the requirements from a business perspective and a technical perspective. And we'll need an environment strategy because clearly we don't want to push everything on production, or we don't want to do things on production. We'll need some access controls in there. So, we'll need some deployment strategy in there. So all of that is governance to me.
Thank you. So I also have another question. I sometimes have people talking to me who come from a customer, an end user environment, or perhaps a non-profit environment. In your view, what kind of advice would you give to people in those environments who are looking to potentially grow themselves towards preparing for the CTA?
So from a customer environment, I think they are pretty well placed for some of the things because they actually understand the impact of business requirements on the technology drive. So from that perspective, I found people who actually come in from end user background are very well versed on the business side of things, on the governance side of things, because they are usually the people who've been part of that governance or who've helped design and set up things like COEs and TDAs, etc. From a preparation point of view, absolutely start with the certifications. It's very, very important. But I can understand the challenge in there could be, getting exposure to multiple projects, which potentially in a consulting you'll see 2 or 3 different kinds of programs. In a customer environment, you're probably just seeing one type of program. So to get that variability in your view, there's a lot of good material out there. Read up. If you can network and go to these community and user group events, and I know, Gemma, you run some great events and great study groups, join those, because just talking to different people and reading up and joining these community groups brings you different perspectives of different industries. Also doing as many mocks and thinking of as many business scenarios as you can from a Salesforce perspective, and just thinking out of the box a bit, just getting out of your own, say, industry knowledge a bit helps.
And it looks like we have a... Oh,
yeah.
Sorry,
I was going to say the same thing, Susanna.
So yeah, it looks like we have a couple of questions coming in via the chat, which is great. Folks, continue to put those in there. I'll start taking the first one. This one's kind of related. Andre asked, in your opinion, is it possible to pass CTA without real project experience, but only by preparing through mock exams and having a mentor?
Highly unlikely. I mean, I'm obviously no one here to say who's going to pass CTA and who's not, and it really depends on individual skills, and maybe some people can, but I would say highly unlikely. Mm-hmm. Also bear in mind that there is no point doing a CTA exam if you really don't have real project experience, because the whole idea of CTA is to give you that, is to, one, assess your real life architecture experience, and how you apply your knowledge in real life scenarios, and the board exams and the board scenarios are normally, quite relevant, quite realistic business cases. And if you've never worked on a project, you would probably not understand applications of the architectural concept on those business cases. And that is extremely important. Like I said, it's not just what you know, it's how you contextualize it in for the scenario that matters. So without real project experience, you probably not know all the subtleties, and you'll probably not know the variations and alternative methods. And also will be hard to know challenges of, what are the common challenges of, there's something theoretical about it, but then what could be a challenge? In what case you might not be able to apply a best practice, and then what's the second best method? So those kind of things come by experience. So yeah, so that one's going to be tricky.
Definitely. And then we have one more question in the chat that I like. I have the same question, actually, Abhishek. I think it's a good one. So during your preparation for CTA, Emily, what did your daily ritual look like? Like, what things did you do on a daily basis that you think helped you succeed in passing? And I guess a follow-up, it says it looks like how much time did you dedicate each day to preparing?
Yeah, this is a good one, because I think I had a life before CTA and I have a life after CTA. I probably didn't have.
Totally relate.
I am sure anyone who's been on this journey can relate to that. So I had a very normal life before CTA, where I had a family. I still have a family, thankfully. And then during my CTA, I just had to make changes to my daily routine. So it was not enough what I was doing during my day job to prepare for the CTA, is my experience. Though I had the knowledge, and though I did all my certifications, and I was working with Salesforce and I was working with programs, I just felt there were a lot of knowledge gaps and practice that I needed to do. So I think about 3 months before my review boards, I started planning at least 2 hours in the evening for at least 4 days a week was my target. And in that 4 days a week, sometimes weekdays would be very difficult because I was traveling a lot. So I would just do 2 to 3 hours over a weekend. And then, 2 days, 2 hours over 2 of the weekdays or something like that. But at least, and this is the minimum, I would say 10 hours a week dedicated to your CTA prep. 8 to 10 weeks before your boards is normal. And I know I did a lot more than that, but that's really the minimum I think that people have to put in. And this is considering you are already very good and you've got things under control, because I know towards the end I was putting in a lot more. I was putting in a lot of weekends on it. I did set expectations with my friends, with my family, that I'm going to be extremely unsocial over the next 2 months. I'm not going to attend, Friday night outs, and I'm not going to go out on Saturdays, and I'm not going to do my normal routine stuff, because any time that I could carve out, I was carving out for my preparation, because I just felt no matter how much I put into it, I just never felt prepared enough. And that's one more thing. I don't think anyone ever feels fully prepared when they go into the review boards. I'm not sure whether there's even a thing or feeling called fully prepared for CTA.
No.
You just have to go in with your best gut feeling.
I've got a question for you around data modeling. I find I do a lot of consulting and working on projects where we come up with a design and we have to build it and the whole thing. And I'm finding when I'm preparing mocks for the CTA, I go way too deep. I can spend so much of my prep time, my 2 hours, thinking through all the intricacies of, the data model. Should I pick orders with line items, or should I do custom objects? Should I do this and that? And I have a really hard time staying high level enough to get it done in 2 hours. I don't know if you have any, and because my experience is I have to, in the end of the day, build it. Whereas this one, it seems like with the CTA, you don't have time in 2 hours to do all of that and have an idea in your head exactly how it will be built, each click, So I don't know
Yeah.
if you have suggestions on how to keep myself out of the weeds and pick something and go with it, because I spend, a whole hour of my 2 hours thinking about the data model and I don't have time for the rest.
Yeah, I think that's quite a common thing that most of us go through. But you have to remember, this is an architect exam. It's not a Salesforce implementation exam, and you don't have to know. You don't have to know because you don't have to know exactly what fields you're going to add onto your data model, because that's not relevant. That's low-level design stuff. So from an architecture perspective, as long as you know what your high-level objects are which relate to your business data and how your solution is going to hang together based on that data model, I think you should stop there. And I'll be very honest, I think data model is the one thing that takes most of the time in your prep. I think it's probably about 40% to 45% of your prep time within that 2 hours, and which is not a bad thing because it is the most complex thing to do. But then I would avoid going into detail. So once you've, say, for example, identified that you need an accounts object and that accounts objects relate to a business account and you're going to have 2 record types in there, that's where I'll stop. I will not think about, what all exactly is it going to use. But on a high level, as I understand, all my customers are going to be in accounts, all my contacts are going to be in contacts. The sharing model dictates that they're going to be a master detail. I'm going to maybe have a custom object related to the accounts because this, there's nothing which is standard which fits into that. And this custom object is going to hold I don't know, something like books, for example. Maybe something called books was in the, we were doing a scenario on libraries and we had to have a catalog of books, and there was, you need a custom object called books, which has to be related to a customer called accounts. And that's it. I'll stop there. Don't think about, exactly how much data your books will hold versus your book lines. So think of it as addressing on a very high level requirement. I wouldn't even think about any fields in there or lookups only where it's relevant. So if books is related to account, I'll just think about that relationship. Does it need to be a master detail or does it need to be a lookup? And that is normally driven by, the sharing rules and the visibility rules. But beyond that, I won't think about the details, because remember, you're just modeling a very high level business case here. And as long as all your whatever is needed in your high level solution, is seen in your data model, you should be okay. And no one's expecting a perfectly buildable data model in 2 hours. It's practically not possible.
Yeah. I had an example where it was just very high level. It was, we've got 8 countries worth of leads coming in and they want to route it by zip code. So then I thought, oh, lead assignment rules. And then I started thinking, well, wait a minute, 8 countries worth of zip codes. That's a lot of line items. So now, okay, what about, territory management? Well, it also has limits. And then it's like, oh, now I've got a kind of custom territory object with custom territory definitions by zip. And then I was like, whoa. So I don't know. And then, for that example, I looked at the key and it said, oh, lead assignment rules. And I thought, well, wait a minute, am I going too far with that? Or, is it just the,
Yeah. So in that case, in the example you took, say, for example, if you think that the first solution, which was lead assignment rules, is a standard feature, and that was the first thing that came to your mind. But then if the second thing that comes to your mind is, oh, I'm going to hit limits with it, then just think about, so if I'm going to hit limits with the standard way, I'll probably use a trigger to drive off, I don't know, a custom zip codes list somewhere, right? And do the assignment dynamically, and that's it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have another question. Well, in fact, we have a few really good questions coming in, so thank you for submitting those. So Jeremy wants to know, would you have a standard agenda to follow during presentations? So like, for example, system landscape, then users, then role hierarchy. And could you share with us what you felt was best, worked best for you?
Yeah, so some of the agenda I feel is common. So, as we all know through our mocks, that every mock we do, we normally do a system landscape, and it's best practice to start with a system landscape. There'll always be a role hierarchy and data model, because these are the elements which will always drive your sharing, visibility, and security aspects. They will, then look for sharing and visibility, obviously, and what else is driven by that. So maybe profiles, licenses are a big thing, because if you get your if you don't mention your licenses, or that means you don't know your licenses, and that means you don't exactly know how your sharing will work, because different licenses have different kind of object accesses, and so license is one thing that I'll start with, because that is kind of your basis. That is where you're setting up your product and you're setting your context. Then I'll probably go on to system landscape, data model, role hierarchy, and the rest of the section. So everyone has a different flow. What I would suggest is, in the first 1 or 2 practice sessions, just put it in different orders and see what works best for you in terms of your flow of presentation. And once you've found that you're really comfortable with the flow, so for example, you're really comfortable starting off with a license, and then going on to a system landscape, and then going on to the role hierarchy, etc., stick to that flow. What I would advise against is, don't keep changing your own flow, because everyone has a different flow in which they like to speak, and everyone has a different way of presenting. So find what's most comfortable to you, but once you've found it, template it and stick to it, and then practice with the same flow, so that on the day, one, you're in your comfort zone, because you've already practiced speaking and presenting in a certain order, and it might vary depending on the scenario on the day, but very slightly. And also, it also gives you a sense of completeness, because you will normally know if you're missing a big part, and under pressure, we all forget things, and we don't want to be forgetting anything. So as long as we've practiced the flow, and in our mind, we've made a few blocks of information that we think are relevant, and doing that in a certain order will give you the confidence in the presentation that, yes, you've covered everything, because that's what you've been practicing with.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just thinking as well, because you mentioned how everybody has their own style. What we're trying to do is build a bank of recorded mock reviews, so that you can have a look at how other people are structuring their presentations as well, and see if you can get some ideas. Throughout the course of my preparation, I've seen a few people present in different ways, and I've also spoken to a couple of CTAs to ask, and they've shared a couple of their ideas with me, and I've picked and chosen some of the best ones that work for me. So there is no real right answer, and the same for like scenarios as well. When you're practicing your mock, it's very tempting to try and get hold of a key for that particular scenario to see what the right answer is. But I think that the right answer is that there is no right answer.
Yes.
Especially because Salesforce is changing so much. Every quarter it changes.
Absolutely.
As long as you've picked something that works and is justifiable, right?
Completely agree. As you said, there is no right answer. Like in any real life project, there is no right architectural answer. There are alternatives, and you have to choose the best alternative based on your current situation and your environment. It's the same in the review board. You could have multiple ways, architectural ways of addressing a requirement, but in the context of what you're given in the scenario, choose what feels the best to you. And for the presentation, again, Gemma, as you said, it's your own flow. Everyone processes information differently, and everyone has a different style of presentation, and everyone likes doing things differently. So there is no set template which says you have to do a system landscape first, or you have to do something first, because it really just depends on you. As long as you know what it is and what your own style is, you're fine.
Yeah. Okay, a couple more questions. So we have one from Rampali, who is asking about the Heroku Architecture Designer exams that have just been released as beta exams. Rampali would like to know how you see the role of knowledge around customized end portals, and if you have any advice for how we could prepare on that in that regard.
So knowledge on Heroku? No, sorry. What was the question again?
So the question was around how do you see the role of knowing Heroku around,
Okay.
given that they've just come out as a beta exam? I mean, what kind of level of depth do you think, in your opinion, people should prepare to?
So from my experience, and as you said, Gemma, Salesforce changes every quarter, and the CTA exam evolves every time. If you look a few years ago, probably we didn't have anything Marketing Cloud. Now we have Marketing Cloud products. So maybe, in your review board, you're expected to know at least a solution to adhere to Marketing Cloud requirements, if there are any. Similarly with Heroku and any other project, because it's so evolving, I really can't say it's not going to be there or it's going to be there, but there's always a possibility that it will get included at some point. And the depth of knowledge, I'm not sure that it'll be at the level in which you'll actually do your Heroku exam focused on that, because remember, this is CTA and, it's an architecture exam, but from an architecture perspective, if it's ever included, I'm assuming it's going to be from an architectural level and how it fits in with the rest of the architecture.
Yeah, and there's a similar question around the optional ones like community and mobile. I mean, would you recommend taking those on, given that they're optional?
I would highly recommend taking on community and mobile, because I know they're optional exams, but again, from these days, any business scenario, would definitely have, like, any customer you work with has a mobile element to it. And it's from a high level architectural perspective, I think it's just good to know the whole architecture of community and mobile and how it fits in with the core Salesforce and how it works, because that makes your solution complete. So yeah, definitely, I would 100% recommend it.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I learned loads from doing the mobile piece, and I'm more of a functional end of the candidate spectrum. But I found the mobile piece actually helped me understand Visualforce much better.
Yeah.
So there's another question from Jeremy, who would like to know what your views are on times if you were to position a suboptimal combination of user license, data model, etc. And rather than using custom, I mean, what would be your thoughts around that?
So as I said, every requirement has and would definitely have a number of ways to address it. But you in the CTA board, what they're looking for, I guess, is the optimal solution in that case. So if you've got 4 options, and as long as you can justify based on the context of that scenario why the solution you're recommending is the optimal solution, and maybe even mention why the other 3 are suboptimal, as long as you have that justification, I think that's the right thing to do. As I said, there is no right or wrong answer, but it is your knowledge and your thought process that has to come out clearly, and that can only come out when you're justifying why a particular option is optimal versus why are the others suboptimal. So the one thing I did, and this is just my style, is whenever I say I recommend something, and if I've had thought about 2 other options, I would just give them a passing mention saying, I recommend this option, but I thought about option A and option B, and this is the reason I didn't choose option A or option B, and that is why this is my option, because something in the scenario told me that this is the right way to go, and then you give your reasons for why you went with your option. And that's always a good thing to do, because that demonstrates knowledge and also that holistic thinking that I was talking about, that you just didn't think of it as one solution. You knew the other options, and you had a particular reasoning and thought process to it for making your selection, which is very important to demonstrate, I think, in a review board.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Rampali, thank you so much for your lovely compliment. That was really kind of you to say so. I wanted to just, she's got one more question for you. What's next after CTA for you, Emily?
So I've recently taken over a team from a leadership perspective for MuleSoft. So I think the next set of certifications for me will most naturally be MuleSoft certifications, and I'm really looking forward to starting a new learning journey now.
That's fantastic. Do we have any more questions at all? Would anybody like to ask anything? Okay. Well, oh, Abhishek would like to ask something. Do you want to unmute, Abhishek? Feel free. Okay. Oh, he says it's a bit noisy. Okay.
Hi, Sir Rampali here. One question regarding this Salesforce VPQ. So how do we see like CPQ capabilities also being tested as part of this CTA?
Well, as I said, any product that comes in and which has been around in the Salesforce ecosystem, there is always a possibility for that getting included in the CTA at some point. So it's always good to be aware. And CPQ has been around for quite some time. It's quite common as well. So yeah, I would say be aware. Again, from an architectural perspective, you don't normally for anything CTA, you normally don't have to know to the level of implementation and development on it, but the architectural concepts and how it hangs together with the rest of the Salesforce. If you were to get a requirement on it, would you be able to recommend this as a product? And would you be able to define your reasons on why use Salesforce CPQ, and what would it bring to the table in respect to your solution? Would be a good way to approach it. And it's the same for any other product, really, Marketing Cloud, Pardot, whatever.
Okay. What are your thoughts around, let's say you're looking through a scenario and you know that there are you're trying to make a decision about what solution to position. But you know that you're trying to decide on the solution based upon soft limits. That you could request Salesforce support to raise for you. I mean, have you ever come across that scenario during your mocks at all? And what would be your views on that?
So remember, this is an exam simulation. So though it is a business scenario and it's meant to be closer to real life, it's not real life. So the 2 or 3 things that I normally take under my assumptions are, I have no budget constraints in there, so I'm not making my choice based on the money I have, because no one's told you how much money you have. And the second thing is, feel free, take the artistic license to recommend the best possible license or product that you feel is relevant to that solution without thinking of how much it will cost. Though in the real world scenario, we'll probably never do that. There's always a budget constraint. The second one is to decide which, if there are limits, whether soft or not, I would stick to the limits just to be safe. Because even though exceptions, and it also depends, I think, on how much are you going to go over by the limit. So if if you know that it's marginal, then maybe you could just get away by saying, maybe we'll go over marginally by this limit. So one of your justification is, I didn't think that proactively I needed to worry about this because we might or might not hit this limit. There's not enough evidence in the scenario to tell me whether I'm going to hit the limit or not. And that's just way to justify your solution. The other one could be, you could take a safe approach and say, the scenario suggests that I'm going to go way over the limit. So I've got this alternative plan to deal with this limits. And the reason I took this decision was, I'm assuming that we're not going to push for limit, though I'm aware that these are soft limits and Salesforce support can actually increase these limits. So as long as you caveat your answer with one, it's a soft limit versus hard limit, and you took a conscious decision to go either ways. Again, there's nothing wrong or right about it because it was your conscious decision. And then because if the scenario doesn't tell you explicitly that the customer is not going to go to Salesforce support for increasing any limits, you've got the right to assume either they will, or you've got the right to assume they won't, and then plan your solution around it, as long as you mention the assumption that you made. And if it's clear the assumption that you made and you can justify your answer, you're fine.
Yes, assumptions are definitely your friend here.
Yeah.
You can tell the story however you want, really, as long as the solution that you can tie the assumption back to the solution that you're positioning, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did attend one mock I was doing for someone who came up with what I would say is a very brave solution, which was completely unconventional, and anyone and everyone would have challenged that solution. But when I asked him about it, he articulated it so beautifully, and he had so many justifications for it that I found it really hard to tell him that that's not the optimal way, because clearly he had a set of assumptions, he had a clear train of thought, and he demonstrated that he understood deeply what he was talking about. So even though on paper, it didn't jump out to me as the most optimal solution, but what it did demonstrate was that he understood what he was talking about, and he had a reason for what he did, which was a valid reason. Hard to refute.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because we have design reviews at our place of work, and sometimes I'll sit in and look at what some of my colleagues have started to propose. And I think yesterday I was doing one, and a colleague positioned a custom object, and my first instincts were like, why are you doing that? But actually, as you say, he was able to justify it so well. Ultimately I had to say, well, it's not the way I would do it, but you've justified it well. It's going to add value to the client. The volumes aren't too high. Just watch out for your sharing and visibility. Watch out for your relationship and listen out for skew and things like that. But yeah, it looks fine to me.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that, because every time you do a custom object, it's not necessarily the wrong answer. Maybe, in the scenario, the optimal way of doing something is a custom object, because maybe you'll be doing it, you'll have to go very complicated if you didn't have a custom object. So you have to weigh your pros and cons, but as long as you are clear in your mind what your assumptions are and what your trail of thoughts are, you'll be fine.
Lovely, thank you. So we've got a couple more career-related questions before we wrap up. So Sanjeev Shah would like to know, obviously I believe they have a background in software development, and not necessarily, so the out-of-the-box configuration and the declarative ways that you can work with Salesforce and build around Salesforce don't come naturally. And things like governance and some of the business acumen side of the certification also don't come naturally. Do you have any suggestions about how to gain depth with the declarative side of the platform?
So the declarative side, I think, if you do your basic certifications like admin and advanced admin and app builder, types of certifications, that gives you the breadth of knowledge on the declarative capability of Salesforce. And then what I did initially, and is if you're into volunteering or pro bono projects, I think those are really good ways of gaining experience. So if you think you don't have the opportunity within the organization to work on a varied project, or you just don't have the bandwidth to fail trying out new things, maybe pick up a small pro bono and start building a Salesforce for them, or maybe become an admin for a nonprofit for a few months and see how that works. Because I find pro bonos are one, they're extremely satisfying because you're giving back, and there's a feel good factor about volunteering, of course. And with all that positive energy also comes your positive learning, because it's mostly you're not in a harsh environment when you're doing a pro bono, and you've got more bandwidth to fail and correct yourself and take your time and understanding. So for people who are trying to get their pro bono skills, their declarative skills up, either find a project to shadow or do. And if you can't, then look for opportunities outside your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that too. I'm a functional person. My last project, I was asked if I would go and be a technical architect on it, and it would have been my first TA engagement, and it was just designing integrations. The actual work was being done by a team of developers. So I think a good message there is about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. But equally, I love what you said, Emily, about getting involved in pro bono work and giving back to your local community. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, pick up your school and design a fund management system for them. Maybe pick up a local preschool and do it for them.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, final question before I'm going to let Emily go and have her dinner and relax for the evening. So for somebody who's been working with Salesforce as a developer, maybe a couple of years, worked on a few projects, started off with Sales Cloud, maybe done a bit of Service Cloud, working on Einstein Analytics. But for someone with that kind of background in software development, what would you recommend as a sort of way to kickstart their journey to CTA?
So I think,
roughly how much time would you recommend? Sorry.
I think definitely start with the pyramid of certifications, and then from a practice point of view, as soon as you've done a cert or done preparing for a cert, try and apply those principles and patterns on your existing project if you're working on a project. And no matter what cloud you're working on, and normally the architecture and patterns remain the same, or try and take interest in the other work streams. So if there's a separate team who's doing integrations, try and sit into their architectural overview meetings, or try and see if you're doing an agile project. I used to go to the show and tells at the end of the sprints for other work streams to see what they've done, ask questions about why they did it in a certain way, and not because I had enough knowledge via the certification to then go dig into some of the stuff that they had done, but I hadn't done it myself, but then I gained from others' experiences. And from a timelines perspective, it is really individual. Some people like me, I did CTA in 2.5 years, but it was a diligent 2.5 years, I would say. I had CTA on my mind from day one. From the day I passed my admin exam, I knew I was going for the CTA, and I just kept at it for 2.5 years, and I was diligent about it. For some people, that's not always a possibility. They take 4 or 5 years, even 6 years. I know people who are still trying to pass a CTA after their 8-9 years of experience. So it really varies on how diligent you are. If you think you're the types who can sit every evening and every second weekend or something like that, and and just go at it, then great. I think your run up to the CTA would be much shorter than someone who's maybe likes to learn by experience and doesn't find the knowledge they do on the certification exam relevant unless they've implemented it on projects, and that's a different style of learning, and that's where it will probably take you longer time for you to feel comfortable enough to go for the review board. So I was someone who could do a blend of learning versus the projects I did, versus learning on other projects and do a few stretch assignments, and then learning from others' mistakes and learning from my network. So that way of learning worked for me, but it doesn't work for everyone. So it really depends on what your style of learning is.
Okay, thank you so much, Emely, for giving us your time this afternoon, this evening, this morning.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everybody who dialed in and watched online. Really appreciate it. And if you have any more questions that you would like us to pass on to Emely, I'm sure she'll be more than happy to check them over. And we hope to see you at our next study group. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Gemma. Bye.
Thanks, Emely.